I make it 2 minutes past 5, so we will begin. And let me begin by thanking you all so much for coming and saying we are so excited for this event tonight. We can't wait to share with you the results of our Burundi longitudinal long-term impact evaluation. Now, almost exactly 1 year ago, I was in Burundi meeting some of our savings group members. And for those of you who are newer to Five Talents, let me tell you about just one of them so that you can get more of a sense of what we do. So meet Irene. This is Irene from Burundi. She lives in a remote rural village, and before she joined a Five Talents group with the Mothers Union, she was really struggling to make ends meet. But a friend invited her to join a group, so she decided she would take the plunge. She joined the group. She learned how to read and write and count, first of all. And then once she and her friends, most of the women had not been able to complete school when they were girls. So once they'd become literate and numerate, they started to save their money together in a box just like this one, week by week, all the while going through financial literacy, business skills, and other trainings offered by the Mothers Union. Five Talents always partners with a local partner, and in Burundi, that's the Mothers Union Burundi. So all the training was delivered by Mothers Union Burundi in the local languages. And once Irene and her friends had been through the training and saved enough money in that box, they decided to start making loans to one another. And first of all, Irene took a loan and she used it to invest in some mice. Now, you might wonder why mice is a business opportunity, but in parts of Burundi, people use them for meat where they can't afford any other forms of meat. So Irene was able to sell these mice for people to eat, and she made a good profit. And then with the profits, she decided to invest in some rabbits, and the rabbits bred as rabbits do, when she sold the rabbits for profit too, also for meat. And with the profits from that business, she invested in some chickens, and the chickens laid eggs as chickens do. And at that point, she began making profit from the eggs, but she also decided to diversify thanks to the business skills training she'd had from Mothers Union Burundi. So she bought some flour and some sugar as well, and along with the eggs, she started baking cakes and selling them by the roadside, as you can see in this picture here. And then finally, with the profits from all of these businesses, Irene was even able to buy a goat. Also, Irene used some of her profits to buy reading glasses. You can see in the last picture, she was wearing reading glasses, and she was able to pay for some of the costs of her children's wedding. Her children had grown up by then. Now, Irene's story really illustrates the changes, the impacts over time. She went from not being able to make ends meet, not being able to read and write, to selling mice, rabbits, chickens, cakes, even a goat, buying reading glasses, investing in her children's future. So Irene is just one example of how these impacts deepen over time. And those of you who do know Five Talents will know we have many, many stories just like Irene's from all over the world. But what we've never had before is objective impact data verified by a third-party independent consultant that can prove those impacts are in fact true across a whole cohort, a whole community of savings groups. And that's what we're bringing you tonight through this Burundi evaluation, and that's why we're so excited about it. So tonight, Hannah, who is the monitoring and evaluation lead from our programme team, will be sharing with you these results. And Maria, who is our programme team lead from Burundi, is also with us, so she'll be able to answer questions too. We owe both Hannah and Maria a massive debt of thanks. They've done a huge amount of work on this evaluation alongside the independent contractor. And we also owe a huge debt of thanks to Claudette, who is the Mothers Union Burundi coordinator from Burundi. It's fair to say that without Claudette, probably none of the impacts you're going to hear about tonight would have happened. She's been an inspirational, visionary leader right from the start of this programme, leading the Mothers Union Burundi to deliver massive and really, truly impactful programmes. So Claudette, we salute you. Just before I hand over to Hannah, let me share with you how this impact evaluation came to pass. It's actually one of the silver linings of the coronavirus pandemic. Back in May 2020, we as Five Talents were asking ourselves, how are savings groups coping during the pandemic? What does lockdown look like in all the different places where we work? Are savings groups sharing out all the money so that they can use it now, or are they keeping it knowing they're going to need it for loans for tomorrow? How are they keeping that money safe? How are they themselves being part of the solution? We knew that organised groups of women would be leading community responses, and we wanted to find out what was happening. So we asked all of our partners to survey a sample of their savings groups so we could find out what was going on. The big surprise came back from the Burundi team, who sent us data on over 800 savings groups. Now, at the time, we were supporting around about 140 savings groups. As many of you know, we fund these groups for around about 3 years as they go through the literacy training, the financial literacy, the business skills training, and then they graduate. So we don't fund them, we don't support them anymore, neither does the Mothers Union. So at that time in 2020, we were funding 140 savings groups, but we got data from over 800 groups. So we asked Claudette, where are all these savings groups? And she said, oh, we thought it would be interesting to go back to some of the historic groups that have graduated to see how they were coping during the pandemic too. So we said, wow, you're still in touch with all these groups. As soon as the pandemic is over, we have to do a long-term deep impact study to find out how impacts have changed over time for those groups. And that, therefore, is exactly what we did, and that is what we're sharing with you tonight. So let me now hand over to Hannah to share with you the top line results. I think Hannah's going to speak for around about 20 minutes, and then there'll be time for lots of questions at the end. So please do write your questions in the chat box as we go along. And also, can I encourage you to take pen and paper or your phone or wherever you take notes, and just write down as we go 2 or 3 statistics or impacts that really speak to you. You're going to hear a huge amount of impact. It can be quite overwhelming. So do just jot down the ones that really speak to you, and we'll come back to those at the end. Thank you so much, everyone. Hannah, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's great to see so many of you with us. Thank you for joining. As Rachel says, my name's Hannah. I'm part of the programme team at 5 Talents. So today we're going to look at the Burundi, the evaluation that was recently done on the programme that 5 Talents supports in Burundi. So just to give you a kind of a brief idea of how this is going to be structured, we're going to briefly look together at some of the context of the programme in Burundi, both the history of the programme as well as a little bit about Burundi itself. And then we'll look at the report, thinking about what we were trying to learn through the report, but also spending a little bit more time on the findings and some of the key impacts. And then, as Rachel says, there'll be time for a Q&A at the end. So please do type your questions into the chat, and Megan will keep hold of them, and then we'll go through those at the end. And then there'll be a short time at the end for Chris, the co-CEO, to speak about what's next following this evaluation for 5 Talents. So first of all, for those who don't know, I thought I'd share a bit of context about Burundi. So Burundi is a very small country in East Africa. It ranks as one of the least socio-economically developed countries in the world. And in Burundi, women and children tend to be the most impacted by poverty. So women often have fewer opportunities to attend school, for example. So one of the things that this means for women is that often illiteracy rates are higher for them than they are for men. So 5 Talents partners with Mothers Union Burundi to deliver the programme. And Mothers Union Burundi's focus is on sustainable development and poverty reduction by promoting the participation of women in Burundian society. Some of you might recognise this lady. This is Claudette Kigemi, who Rachel was talking about at the start. She's the coordinator for Mothers Union Burundi. And she's an incredible leader who's led Mothers Union Burundi for over 2 decades. And as Rachel says, much of what we're going to discuss here really speaks to the impact that Mothers Union Burundi and Claudette have had through the work that they've been doing. So as I say, Mothers Union Burundi is a movement of incredible women focusing on advocating for the rights of women in Burundi. So a little bit of history about the programme. So before 5 Talents partnered with Mothers Union Burundi, in 2001, Mothers Union Burundi started a literacy and empowerment programme, which was started in response to the low literacy rates, particularly amongst women. But the programme didn't just focus purely on literacy and numeracy. Instead, it focused on helping communities to see and identify often unrecognised resources that they might have. So that could be physical resources, knowledge-based resources, experience-based resources and knowledge, relationships they might have with one another, and use and mobilise these to achieve social change. And this process is often pivotal as well in changing how people perceive themselves. Maybe a woman has never been to school and so sees herself as somebody who doesn't have much knowledge or understanding. And actually, instead, this programme was focused on identifying the things that people do have knowledge on and mobilising around those to try and achieve change in these communities. And this programme was hugely successful. And as a result, in 2010, Mothers Union Burundi identified that they wanted to add a savings group element to the programme to allow groups to improve their economic situations and build on the impacts from the literacy programme. So as a result of the literacy programme, people often identified, for example, that they wanted to improve their access to healthcare, and part of that might be advocating for their right to that, and part of that might also be being able to make the investments in that happen. So that's where the savings group element kind of became part of the vision that Mothers Union Burundi had. This picture here is one of the first saving groups in Matana Diocese back in 2011, so just after Five Talents partnered with Mothers Union. So the programme today, in many ways, encompasses some of that history. So all of the groups, even today, begin as literacy classes before they then start to save and loan together after around 1 year of literacy. So in this picture, this is a picture of a literacy class taking place. You can see a learner, who is the woman who's by the board. She's writing on the board in a table which combines vowels and consonants to make different sounds, which the group then put together to make words in the local language Kirundi. And then on the left of the board, you might be able to make out there's a tree, and this is a solution tree, as we call it. And the group has used this solution tree to think together, to organise their ideas around a challenge they have, and thinking about what they could do to try and change that. So what might be the things that they could do, the actions they could take, and what result that might be, or what that might result in. So this is just one example of how the literacy groups combine literacy learning and mobilising around social change. And then the lady on the right, who's kind of looking on, she's the facilitator of the group. So she's a volunteer from the same community as the learners, and she's been trained by Mothers Union Burundi, and she will support the group for 2 years. So starting from literacy through to them also becoming and being supported to run an effective savings group. So moving to the evaluation itself, so Rachel shared a little bit about kind of the context and kind of what almost provoked us to think it would be really interesting to look more at this. And one of the key aims that we wanted to, or one of the key kind of focuses of the evaluation, was to look at the longitudinal impacts, meaning the impacts within the groups over time. So the groups are supported by their facilitator for 2 years, but after that, they don't receive any further support, and they go on and they continue saving and loaning. And we wanted to learn more about what specifically happens beyond that period, so beyond the period that they're supported by the programme. And the evaluation was conducted by an independent consultant, and you can see a little bit here about the methodology. So it included focus groups, surveys, interviews, and then also looking at existing documentation of the programme. Just very briefly, to give you an idea of the number of people consulted in the evaluation, a survey was conducted to reach programme participants, and in total 570 participants were reached by the survey. And obviously one of the central aims was to look at the long-term impacts of the programme. And as you can see from this graph, the vast majority of the sample were participants who had joined the programme between 5 and 22 years ago. So again, this means that those groups have, for many, many years in some cases, been working without the support of their facilitator, and that's what we were most interested in, seeing the longitudinal impact of the work. So today we're going to give a short summary of the findings, but there really is so much in this report and so much to celebrate. So if you go to our website, you'll be able to access a summary of the report and also the full report, and we'll provide the links to these at the end of the presentation. So today we're going to look at 5 different impact areas. So the first impact area that we're going to look at is literacy and the impact on literacy rates. So through this programme, through the literacy part of the programme, more than 144,000 literacy learners have been accredited as literate. And what we mean by that is they've taken the government accredited literacy exam and passed. And that 78% of those people are women. So the programme has a particular focus on reaching women. Those 144,000 learners equate to about 2.9% of the adult literate population in Burundi. So this is obviously a huge and a remarkable achievement for the programme and a significant contribution to Burundi. So the evaluation found that becoming literate, and women in particular seeing that they had value and that they could affect change in their communities, led to an increase in self-confidence and also hope for their future. Specifically, the evaluation found that spiritual transformation, so when people saw themselves as loved by God and made in God's image, that was often a precursor to having almost a vision and a belief and a hope in wider change in their community. So this quote from the Bishop of Gitega Diocese in Burundi demonstrates some of the impact of the literacy programme. So he said, the programme does not only get people literate, but the participatory approach gives power to the people to discuss the issues relevant to them and to come up with solutions to address them. So one example of what the bishop means can be seen in gender-based violence. So the evaluation found that 98% of participants advocated against gender-based violence as a result of their involvement in the programme. And the evaluator attributed this to the discussions which took place in the literacy classes using the discussion tool. So the solution tree we saw earlier is one example, but there are many others. And also the participants' increased confidence and their drive to change their society. And this change was not confined to gender-based violence. So this graph here shows the difference in members sending girls to school in 2006 compared to 2022 on the right. In 2006, just 62% of women reported sending their female children to school, compared to 91% in 2022. So obviously that's a significant increase. In 2006, the programme was focused on literacy and empowerment, but hadn't yet integrated the savings group element. That didn't come until 2010. And the evaluation notes that since 2006, the participants have the means to act on their desire to provide an education for girls through access to loans and increased incomes. So participants' increased inclusion and participation in society began during the literacy groups and then was sustained and enhanced through their membership in the savings groups. The evaluation found that these different elements of the programme worked together, they complemented each other, and helped to achieve the impacts reported by so many. The literacy groups, and especially the discussions around social change, led to a desire to invest in positive changes. And then the savings group element via the 5 Talents Partnership gave the groups a platform for them to make those investments. So the second impact is about the growth of the programme and also the sustainability of the groups. So we were able to go back and survey groups that were started more than 10 years ago. So on this graph, each bar represents the groups that were started in a particular year, as indicated on the bottom. The percentage in blue shows those that are still meeting and active, and the purple shows groups which are inactive. So overall, across the whole sample, 84% of savings groups we found to be still actively saving and loaning. And as you can see, there is a small drop-off over time, but this is minimal. So what we can see from this is that the vast majority of groups continue to meet well after the 2 years of support. And the evaluator found that the reason for this was that the groups formed really strong relationships as a result of meeting together regularly. They were self-selected, they chose who joined the group. They're self-governing, so they make their own decisions about how they're run and what's important to them. And they build social cohesion through the non-financial activities that they do as a group as well. One of the things that we found was that the programme had grown a lot faster than we expected, as many of the facilitators who were volunteers felt motivated to form new groups in addition to the one that they were expected to support. So when a facilitator is trained, they're given a small incentive, and the expectation is that they will go and form one group. However, this pie chart shows that actually many of the facilitators went and formed many more groups than this. So this pie chart shows the number of groups that facilitators have supported. So you can see in the light purple section in the top right, 12% of facilitators kind of did what we expected and they started one group. But 88% of facilitators have formed more than one savings group, and nearly a quarter went on to form 6 or more groups. So obviously this has had a huge impact on the number of groups that the programme has kind of been able to almost indirectly support. And we think this is kind of speaks to the passion that the facilitators have for the programme, and also how much this programme and the facilitators are valued by communities. So the third impact we're going to look at is economic empowerment. So this graph here shows the percentage of participants reporting a significant improvement in their incomes from their businesses. As you can see, in 2013 on the left, just after the partnership with 5 Talents and therefore the savings groups began, this was quite low. Very few people felt that they were seeing an improvement in their ability to earn an income from their business. But now on the right, in 2022, as it was, over 85% of women and men reported that there has been a significant improvement in this. And you can see that the change is especially significant for women. In focus group discussions, the participants shared that the resource mobilization training, so what I was talking about earlier, helping people identify the potential and the resources that they have, and also using the group as a space to learn, had really benefited people and their businesses. And this, in combination with the literacy and the numeracy training, has resulted in participants starting new businesses or expanding existing businesses. And the evaluation found that members have become more entrepreneurial and more able to identify new business opportunities. I apologise, there's quite a lot of graphs in this presentation, but I hope that I'm trying to convey as much information as we can in a short time. So prior to the programme, the majority of participants were involved in subsistence farming. So what we mean by that is people were farming for their own family's consumption rather than farming to sell it to the market. Through the loans borrowed from the groups and from their increased confidence, participants often invested in growing their agricultural businesses. So, for example, people said that they bought livestock, or sometimes, more significantly, they might have purchased land. And this graph shows the percentage of female on the left and male participants on the right who employ others in their business. And you can see that nearly all have at least one employee now. And 35% of women and 48% of men were saying that they employ more than 2 people in their business. So what we can see from this is that participants move from being subsistence farmers to actually themselves becoming employers. And this speaks to the growth of businesses and also employment opportunities for those beyond the direct programme participants. As I said earlier, Burundi is a small country and land is scarce and the population density is very high. So the purchase of land is very expensive, but it's a significant and an important investment for families because so many people are involved in agribusiness. So this graph here shows the percentage of participants who reported an increase in their ability to buy land by the length of time that they've been a member of the group. So what we can see from this is that the longer a person has been a member of a group, the greater their ability is to make this significant investment in the purchase of land. So we can see that 62% of participants who joined 13 to 22 years ago, compared to 34% who joined 1 to 5 years ago, have been able to buy land as a result of their participation in the programme. So what we can see here is that members are able to accumulate a greater number of valuable assets over time, which obviously strengthens their financial resilience. And the savings groups provide a sustainable platform for people to continue investing in their businesses, even after that 2 years of support from the facilitator and Mothers Union Burundi ends. So the fourth impact is holistic empowerment. So we've seen that there are some amazing impacts around business growth and economic impacts. But then the question is, well, what does this mean for families? So this graph shows the percentage of participants reporting improvements across different areas. So as you can see, there has been a significant improvement in all of these household outcomes. So we can see that as a result of increased incomes, families now benefit from improved housing, access to healthcare, their children benefit from access to higher education. And as we saw earlier, this is particularly true for girls. We can also see that families feel more resilient, so more able to cope in a time of crisis or when something unexpected happens. This is partly due to the financial education, giving them a greater sense of resilience and preparedness, but also in some cases people had purchased assets which they said they would be able to sell in the event of a crisis, which provided them with kind of like a buffer. And the fifth impact is about the empowerment of women, and specifically thinking about their influence over decision making. So the evaluation found that as well as literacy and numeracy skills, participants, and especially women, became more confident and assured of their rights and their ability to advocate for them. And in turn, this led to them taking action on key issues. And one of the key areas of change was gender equality. So the evaluation found that as a result of their growing confidence, women were more likely to take on leadership positions. So this was within the church, also outside in perhaps elected leadership positions in their community. And this increased their decision-making power. So how they felt more able to influence decisions that took place in the household or in the wider community. And women reported that they felt on an equal footing with men in both business and public leadership. So as I said, the evaluation found that 49% of women became church leaders and 53% stood for an elected leadership position in their community as a result of the programme. Women also saw that they can be drivers of change in their communities and see themselves and their advocacy as key for securing their rights. So they have become agents of their own change. And importantly, this change was not isolated to women. So there are also male participants in the programme. And as I mentioned earlier, 98% of both female and male participants reported advocating against gender-based violence. So hopefully that's given you a brief summary of some of the amazing findings of the evaluation. And now I'm going to hand back over to Megan, who is going to lead us through the Q&A.
Thanks, Hannah. Sorry, I'm just setting up my screen here. Thank you everyone for joining and listening to Hannah as she talked through some of the impacts that we found during the longitudinal study. We have a handful of questions. We've got maybe a half an hour, so I'm gonna do my best to get through everyone's, but if for some reason we don't get to you and you are really pressed about your question and really want an answer, you can always reach out to us after the event's ended, and we'll do our best to get that answer over to you. So I'm just going to pop a few people on the screen for you. So we have Maria, who's here. She is a colleague in our US office, and she's a member of our global program team. She often works with the Burundi program directly. She's had several calls with Claudette just this week, I think, in fact. So she's here to help answer some of the questions that you may have. And I'm also going to bring Rachel and Hannah back onto the screen because they both work closely with the programs as well. So hi all, welcome back. I'm just going to throw to you as it's relevant. So one of the first things that people are wondering, I think actually Rachel, I'm going to let you take this one. But literacy clearly is a huge and defining part of the program, but is it really possible to become literate in 6 to 12 months?
This is a very good question, and it's one that I had before I started working with these programs as well. But the short answer is yes, it absolutely is. We know this because across all of our programs, our participants take part in literacy accreditation. So they go through a short test to make sure that they really can read and write and count, and the pass rates for those tests are uniformly between 70 and 80%. So we know it absolutely is possible. It's also fair to say, though, I think that, as Hannah mentioned, a really important part of the literacy learning process is the approach to learning. So it's not a teacher standing at the front teaching the cat sat on the mat, the ball is blue, that kind of thing. The literacy is very much designed for adults, and they are engaged in the process throughout. So as Hannah showed you the picture of the blackboard, the lovely picture of the blackboard, and the topic-based discussion that the group were having then would have been chosen by the group themselves. So the group of women, imagine the women sitting in a circle, the facilitator would say to them, what's going on in this community? So I'm thinking now of a group I visited in DR Congo last year. The facilitator said to them, what's going on in this community at the moment? And the answer sadly was illness. It was malaria season, so a lot of people were sick. So the group first of all had a discussion about what's the cause of malaria and what could they perhaps do to prevent it or to recover from it. And in the process of that, they drew up their problem tree and their solution tree, as we saw in that beautiful photograph. So they were identifying that they themselves had resources and knowledge that they could bring to this problem. And only then, after that, did they move on to the exercise on literacy. So the facilitator wrote the word for malaria on the board in the local language, split it up into the phonetic groups. Everybody practiced writing the different groups of the word, and then they practiced making new words based on the component parts. They all did exercises, writing to practice together, and then they did a numeracy exercise based on if you have 10 malaria nets and 3 have holes in, how many do you have, that kind of thing. So that the whole process is designed to appeal to adults, to work for adults, to cement their own agency, and through that process we found that it is possible for them to learn in 6 to 12 months. Yes.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm going to throw the next one over to Maria, as she works most directly with the program. So we've clearly seen, based on the map itself, that Burundi is quite a small country. So someone's asked Maria, how far is Five Talents reach there, and how big is that program compared to other Five Talents programs in much larger countries?
Thanks. That's a great question. As Hannah showed on the map, Burundi is a very small country. So the Mothers Union Burundi program reaches across the country. They actually have 9 dioceses, and they have the program throughout the country. But that doesn't mean that they have reached all the communities that need to receive the program. So they're still looking at being able to expand the program to new communities that have not been able to receive that training. Because of the size of the country and that they're working through the provincial office of the Mothers Union Burundi and reaching all those dioceses, they have Mothers Union diocesan workers in each of the 9 dioceses who are doing that work. And that means that they have an incredible outreach. As was shared earlier by Rachel, that we saw that, even that during the COVID survey, that they had surveyed over 800 groups. Each year they're starting at over 100 savings groups. And so, or essentially starting first with literacy, and then they roll over into the savings groups through the program. So the growth of reaching new communities in Burundi is quite a bit larger, or it's among the largest that we have with our program partners of annual outreach of starting new savings groups. So it's really incredible. I don't know if Rachel wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think you covered it, Maria.
Great, thank you both. The next one I'm going to send over to Hannah. And it's, so obviously there are really great impacts that you've shared, but this person wanted to know, what are some of the key things that you would want to share with leaders of other FT projects outside of Burundi that have come from doing the study?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think one of the perhaps kind of most significant things that really feels like it's a thread throughout the whole evaluation is how effectively the program has mobilized communities around what they already have, rather than so often those who perhaps kind of spent a bit of time in the development sector will know so often, unfortunately, what happens is an expert from outside comes in and informs people of their situation and also how it should be. And this is so counter to that. And that's kind of like embedded in everything that you see. So right through from the approach to literacy, helping people to organize and share the existing knowledge they have around something. Also the use of facilitators. These are people who are literate, but who are from the same community and chosen by the community. And that's been really, really important. And those things are, I think a lot of the knowledge is shared between partners as well. And we often facilitate that as Five Talents. So you'll see many of those things across other programs as well. But I think this really speaks to kind of the value and the importance of that as well, and the kind of how essential that is to all of the different impacts that we see.
Great, thanks. And one other question while you're not on mute. someone has said it looks like the number of groups formed has actually it's actually nearly double what 5 Talents may have funded. Is that correct? Is that the actual impact number?
Yeah, so each year, as Maria says, 5 Talents, through the money that we raise, we send that to Mothers Union Burundi, and they are able to train facilitators. That's kind of the primary thing that they do. And each year, a number of, I think Maria said, around 100 are trained each year, and new groups are created, and that's amazing. And that in itself is still a very large number. However, what we see from this is that because so many facilitators actually then in subsequent years say, actually, I've not received the incentive from 5 Talents this year or from Mothers Union Burundi this year, but actually I still want to go on and start a group. Actually, the impact is therefore much greater than we thought. So that was another thing that we learned, was actually the impact that we were having was way beyond what we were kind of tracking and aware of. So if the sample of around 500 is accurate, that would mean that if we extrapolated that, around 76% of groups which exist in Burundi were started without the facilitator being incentivized to actually start that specific group. So again, that I really think speaks to what the evaluator calls the spirit of volunteerism and the commitment and passion for the program felt by the facilitators.
Thanks, Hannah. The next one's going over to Rachel. Someone has said the data on sustainability is really impressive. How does that compare to other savings group programs?
So one of the exciting things about this evaluation is that not many other evaluations like this have been done. And that's because many of the larger NGOs, they will support a program for 3 years and then they leave. So they're not still there. They can't really go back and collect that data 10 years later. Whereas for us, because we work through the church, through what we call forever partners like Mothers Union Burundi, it's much easier for us to go back and collect that data 10 years later, as we found when we did this and the COVID survey. So that's to say there are not that many surveys like this. There's 1 or 2 that we know of. There was one done in Mali by the Savings for Change Coalition. There was one done in Nepal. I think CARE did one in Zanzibar a few years ago. And I can't remember the exact stats. I would need to look them up for you. But generally, they were finding around about 70% of their groups, 70 to 80% of their groups, I think, were sustainable. So ours is very much in line or perhaps slightly better than that. But the big takeaway is that not many NGOs are able to do this. So we're delighted that we've been able to add to sector learning.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Maria, I've got another one for you. Today we've talked a lot about practical impacts of the program, but we have talked a little bit about self-confidence and self-perception. And I wondered, this person has asked if you could possibly help us understand a little further some of the spiritual impacts that we saw through the study.
Hi. Oh, that's wonderful. It's really incredible because this study and the evaluator really found that everything is underpinned by faith and action, and with how Mothers Union Burundi and the church are approaching the work. And throughout the study, they found that there are quite a few spiritual impacts as well. And this was something that we actually wanted to be able to see as well as one of the unexpected impacts of the study, because they have had a non-proselytizing approach to the work, but it's been actually really underlying through everything that they've recognized that there's been an impact on the church, first of all, with improved attendance by people. They have the confidence to go to church, increased tithing, even some church planting that has happened throughout the program. But then also with the increased confidence and abilities, individuals have had a spiritual impact themselves. And so the study found that individuals are engaging more deeply within their faith. As Hannah mentioned earlier, when talking about just raising confidence, people are seeing that they're loved by God and that God has provided them the resources and talents that they have. So they're having increased involvement in the church, especially, and women especially are recognizing that they're able to take on more leadership positions in the church and becoming more involved. And so that, of course, impacts the whole family as well. And a lot of this is also impacted by them becoming literate. So people are able to participate in church because now they're able to read the prayers. And that's a really significant part of the program.
Thanks, Maria. I'm going to ask you one more. We've mentioned a little bit about gender-based violence, and there was a really impressive stat that 98% of participants are now advocating against gender-based violence, which is huge and a phenomenal thing. But could you tell us a bit more about how the program contributes to these sorts of impacts?
Yeah, that is really incredible and impressive. And it's actually, within the core of what Mothers Union Burundi wants to do is impacting women's and the situation of women within Burundi. And as Claudette Kigeme always says, that you can't not address women's empowerment or gender-based violence issues without including men. So a big part of the program is that it is not exclusively just for women, but that men are involved in that. And then through the participatory learning and action methodology that they use for literacy training, and which then carries over into what they do with the savings groups as well, really allows the community members to address those issues and talk about what's happening within their community. So it actually is coming up naturally within those discussions, which are both men and women are in those discussions, and they are talking about the issues of gender and gender-based violence that is happening, and then being able to look at the solutions. And when you include men in those discussions, it can make a truly significant impact within the community. I don't know if Hannah wanted to add anything else to that from more on the study that because we've worked on it closely together.
I think you've covered most of it, Maria. I saw that there was a question in the chat, which is perhaps related, which was about the number of, or the percentage of female versus male participants. I think it's in the evaluation. I think that's what the question is about. So the number of female participants was 81%, which is slightly more than the percentage of female participants in the program as a whole, which is 76%. But kind of roughly equates. And as Maria says, the program's focus is on female participation and female empowerment, but it's really, really important that men are part of those conversations. Where men are not part of those conversations, it's really difficult to achieve change, because they can become a block if we're not hearing different people's perspectives. That's a really, really important part of the process. So whilst women are the focus and the majority, men are also included within the program, and therefore also within the study.
Thank you both. I think a lot of this links to some stuff we've been talking about in terms of sort of the participatory learning approach. And we do have a question, Hannah, if you wouldn't mind explaining a little bit more about what that approach is and what it means, and maybe how does it work in terms of a group and in the group context?
Sorry, still not learned how to unmute myself quickly after all these years. Yeah, sure. So we often call the participatory approaches participatory learning and action tools. So the solution tree that we saw earlier is an example of a participatory learning and action tool. Those kind of three elements are really important. So participatory, in that the facilitator doesn't go in there with a kind of predefined idea based on their own knowledge and experience of what the content will be. Instead, they ask questions, and that forms the content of the lesson. They will guide the discussion, of course, but the knowledge and the experience comes from the members themselves. In that way, we learn from one another. So if we're thinking about gender, for example, it might be that men and women share their different experiences. So to talk about gender, a common tool that might be used is something called the 24-hour clock. So you would have two columns, one for men and one for women. And together as a group, you would think, okay, what is it that men are doing during the day at different times? Or what is it that women are doing at different day during the different times? And then the facilitator would ask some questions in order to reflect on perhaps where is the labor being done? Who is making decisions in this community? What does this look like? How do we feel about this? And in that way, everybody would be able to learn from one another effectively, and then the action is kind of, so what happens next? So it might be that a community decides that actually it is really important that girls go to school, and actually what they're seeing in their community is that that's often not prioritized, and actually the education of boys is prioritized, and they might as a group make a commitment to make more of an investment in that. That's certainly something that this evaluation has found. But gender is one example of how these tools might be used, and there are many others as well. And these tools are used, in this case, they begin in the literacy group, but they also continue through the savings group. So in other 5 Talents programs, even those without literacy groups, you will often find them using these tools as a way to for a community to think about their situation and analyze it and understand it.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm going to throw the next one to Rachel. It's a little more big picture, Rachel. So now that we have this really wonderful evidence about the program in Burundi, the question is, what is the next step for Burundi? What's with this evidence, how are we going to scale up and keep moving forward?
Great question. Before we answer that, let me just loop back to the previous one about comparable data from other NGOs on the sustainability of the savings groups. I just checked my source because I didn't want to be giving you duff data. So I can tell you that the Savings for Change study, which was published in 2020, showed that the survival rate for groups between age 7 and 9 years old was 78% in Mali and 64% in Uganda. Before that, the only other study we could find was from Nepal in 2008, so a very long time ago, which showed that 64% of groups were still active 8.5 years after the programme began. So you can see from that our group's 84% sustainability is above those benchmarks. But again, the big takeaway is that there aren't very many NGOs doing those studies. Back to the question, what's next for Burundi? That's a great question. We would love, with the Mothers Union Burundi, to sit down, talk with them and hear what their plans are for the future. As you know, we always try to be partner-led as well as community-led, but we do know that Mothers Union Burundi has a vision to do more. We've seen the impact, we know it works. They do have facilitators in every single diocese across the country, but we know that they haven't yet reached every single parish, every single village, every single community across the country. So there is still more work to do. There are still many more communities who would like these programs. When we were last in Burundi last year, a woman said to us a wonderful quote. She said, you know, what we want you to do is go to communities up the road where they haven't yet learned how to read and write and start savings groups. We don't need you anymore. We can do this ourselves, but we'd love you to go up the road and do it all over again there. So Mothers Union Burundi has that vision to scale up, to grow, to reach more communities, and we would love to walk with them in that. But the first step, as always, is to listen to them and to hear their plans.
Is there any way that we're going to be using this data with the other programs? So obviously we have a lot of Eastern African-based programs and a few outside of Eastern Africa, so one in Myanmar and one in Bolivia as well. Is there any other way that we're going to leverage this data so that those programs can benefit from a lot of the great learning that we've done in Burundi too?
Yeah, absolutely. We're planning a workshop in September, again with the Mothers Union, bringing together all of our partners, and we will be sharing this data with them all over again so that they can sit down and learn from it, ask questions from each other. We always find that the peer learning approach, where the partners sit down together and share their experiences, share their understanding, share what works for them, is the richest form of learning. We've not been able to do that for 2 or 3 years because of COVID, but we did a workshop for all of our partners at the end of last year, and we're planning another, and this evaluation will be one of the topics that we talk about because there's so much for our partners to learn from each other within it. I guess it's fair to say as well that we have seen elements of the impacts that we've shared with you from Burundi. They're not unique to Burundi. We have seen them in other programs as well. So for example, in Karamoja in northern Uganda, we've seen groups form spontaneously outside of the groups that we funded ourselves as 5 Talents. In Marsabit in northern Kenya or in DR Congo, we've seen similar impacts in terms of reduction in gender-based violence. In South Sudan, we've seen similar impacts in terms of the increased resilience that members see. So we know that all of our partners are facing many of the similar challenges, but also they do have the solutions themselves. So we can't wait to sit down with them together in September in the workshop and hear how they want to use these impacts and what they see as the future for their own programs based on what we've learned from this.
Great. Thank you three for being here and for sharing your knowledge and your expertise on the programs and on the evaluation. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so If we haven't answered your question, I'm very sorry. Do send it to me in an email. You can reach us online at info@fivetalents.org.uk, or most of you will have our personal email addresses for the organization. So feel free to send us a message and let us know. I'm now going to throw it over to our co-CEO, Chris, who's gonna wrap us up for the evening. But thank you all again. Thank you, Maria, for being here, and Hannah and Rachel as well.
And big thanks as well to Maria, Rachel, and to Hannah for answering all our questions there. We are really, really delighted with the results of this research. It is so encouraging for Five Talents, and we know it's really encouraging as well for our close friends and partners at the Mothers Union to hear of the transformations that these programs have been achieving in Burundi over these many, many years. Transformations in terms of literacy, people learning to read and write and count. We know that's a lifelong dream for people. Also, the ability to save and to borrow money and to start businesses and to employ people and to put children in school and clothes on their backs and to buy nutritious food and build homes, and all of the transformations in terms of transformations within marriages and communities. It really, really is quite exceptional for us to hear this research. So we're really, really encouraged by it. And it's even more encouraging to hear that groups are replicating over and over and over as there is organic replication. So we hope that you are encouraged as well as you invest your time and your talents and your treasure into Five Talents and into the work of our program partners. Be encouraged that it really is making such a difference to people's lives in East and Central Africa. As we've explained tonight, this research is all about the program in Burundi, but we know these impacts are evident in other programs as well. We're also delighted with the attention that the report has secured for us, the wider interest that there's been in the report. We were able to launch it in the Church Times, which was really brilliant for our profile as Five Talents. There were a number of other online articles as well. And there was even a question in the House of Commons. It was great to hear the research referenced in the House of Commons during one of the question sessions there as well. So in terms of next steps, you may or may not be aware that our strategic growth vision is to double the number of new members entering our programs each year. So between now and 2027, we want to grow the number of new members entering our partners programs from 10,000 a year to 20,000 a year, which is a really, really big vision for Five Talents. But because we know that these programs are making such a difference, we're really fueled in the pursuit of that vision. In order to do that, we effectively need to raise more money and send more money to programs in East and Central Africa so that our program partners can do the brilliant work that they are doing. And our own program team are hard at work as well, building relationships and continuing to invest in programs to see the kind of outcomes that we've seen in Burundi. And this is where you come in. There is a very specific request that we have for you tonight. Rachel said at the beginning, please do jot down 2 or 3 statistics that jump out to you. She did that with specific intent in mind, because we wanted to ask you to share the information that you've heard tonight, to share the outcomes that you've heard tonight with people in your network, maybe your friends or family members or colleagues or others that you're connected to, perhaps within your local church. Share the information of the impact that Five Talents and our program partners are having in East and Central Africa. Maybe that's through conversations or over dinner. Perhaps it's something that you can do online. We're posting social media posts all the time. Please do comment on those social media posts or share them onwards. We would love you to help us reach new people. We know that in order to fulfill our strategic growth vision, we're going to have to continue to keep you, some of our wonderful, wonderful supporters, engaged in the work that we're doing. But we also know that we're going to have to grow our own networks as well. And the best way that that happens is when our wonderful supporters introduce us to their friends and they get to know about the work that we're doing, and they also become involved in supporting as well. So please do share on what you've heard tonight. If there's anything that we can do to resource or help you with that, please do reach out to us. We're very, very committed to making that easy for you as well. So drop us a line or give us a call. Do get in touch with us. I wanted to finish up by sharing a quote, because if you have the opportunity to click onto our website and you have the inclination to have a look at the 100-page report, I know that won't be for everyone, you'll see that that report, in addition to being full of statistics, is full of wonderful quotes as well from people who were surveyed as part of the research. And here's what one member had to say. She said, "The program is life-changing. It gives you a new lease of life. We've learned to read and write, so it's opened our eyes. We can read the Bible and give glory to God. We make money and can feed and clothe ourselves and our children. We've bought land and we've built our homes. We women have become the light of our families." I thought that was such a wonderful quote for us to finish on tonight. Let me finish by saying once again, a huge thank you to you for the way that you support Five Talents. None of this would be possible without your support, and we are so, so grateful for you and all the encouragement and the affirmation and the support that you do give to Five Talents. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a really good evening.